to the score from a few moments ago.
I got involved in the project very soon after the bid was won. I was a design advisor and enabler for CABE, the Design Review Panel, Commission for Architecture and Built Environment. And they set up a special panel, design review panel. So we were set up to review all the master planning that was being done by then EDAL, now ACOM. And that, I was then invited to join David Higgins, set up a special design panel, which he was called the Kitchen Cabinet. There was myself, Stuart Lipton, Nick Sirota, Ricky Burdett, Richard Rogers, and we used to sit down on a monthly basis with David Higgins, Chief Executive, and just go through the designs, master planning, making sure that everything was on track. Out of that, they were advertising at that time for a project sponsor to take on the role of within the ODA as the client for the parklands and public realm. I was a partner in a practice in London. I'd been doing that for 10 years, this really was going to be a chance of a lifetime. So I applied for the job and was very fortunate to get it. So that's how I became the project sponsor for the Parklands and Public Realm at the Olympic Delivery Authority.
And John got in touch with me in roughly 2008 and really wanted someone to assist as an assistant project sponsor. I came along initially part-time and then got more and more involved as the job really started to move through detailed design and ultimately into construction, and have seen it through now to the games, and now in fact doing the job as project sponsor of the legacy company. So I'll be responsible for completing the park through what we call transformation over the next approximately 2 years when it finally opens to the public.
2007, April 2007, I joined, and then took it through right to last year, which would be in August 2011 when I finished. The park was substantially complete a year ahead of the Games, which is what the ODA committed to do. And it was within budget, so it was just a remarkable process to go through that design and delivery process on a £6 billion project, the Olympic Park itself, which you can see from the 23rd story here. It's a remarkable process. Okay, so on the Olympic Park, a £6 billion project, and it's a combination of both permanent venues and temporary venues and a whole infrastructure. So for each of those major venues, for example, the main stadium, the aquatic centre, the international broadcast centre, there was what was called a project sponsor. And there are about, I think, 12 project sponsors for each of the major packages, design and construction packages. And I was responsible for the parklands and public realm, which was essentially everything that wasn't a building. The project sponsor's responsibility is to act as the client. So we were the budget holders, and the budget for the Olympic Park in Games mode was about £240-something million. And we were responsible for appointing the consultants to do all of the design work, managing that process through all of the stakeholders, both external public consultation and statutory stakeholders, making sure that all of those designs were within the budget, writing the business plan, writing the brief, getting the business plan approved, and then making sure that the delivery was done. So in a nutshell, our responsibility as project sponsors was to write the briefs and get the designs delivered on time, within budget, to all of the various stakeholders' satisfaction.
Yes, as I came in as assistant project sponsor, really to help John out initially, and I guess as my role developed, my background, which is in horticulture and landscape architecture and urban design, led me to really focus on initially helping the guidance of the design team through the detailed design, looking particularly at some of the planting aspects, and then really working a lot on site, being a very proactive part of the client, if you like, being on site, attending design team meetings, attending site meetings with the contractors, with our designers, etc. And in that client role, really ensuring that everyone worked together to deal with risks, anything which may be problematic to us or could have been, and ways to mitigate those, and to ensure that our designers, for example, were playing the fullest part they could in the build, because we had a short time to do this, and we wanted to get it right. So we wanted to ensure that everyone was involved at the right level to make that happen.
The process that we went through, which was fairly unusual, where we ended up, but it was just thinking through what was the most efficient way of getting consultants on board and then working with contractors to make sure that we got the best designs and the best quality of landscape at the end of the day. EDOR ACOM were appointed as the master planners. They did the original master plan that supported the bid, and they were appointed to continue in that role, in the master planning role. And they did an absolutely fantastic job of getting all of the infrastructure in the right places, the venues in the right places, the roads, the highways, the concourse, the parklands themselves. And the park at the heart of the park, and Jason Pryor, who was a landscape architect who led the master planning team right the way through the process, and Bill Hanway at EDOR ACOM, they were very clear that the park at the heart was never contested, that in all of the politicians and the press, the public, in all the consultations, that the park at the heart was actually, it became the focus for the whole of the master plan. What we needed to do then, having this fantastic master plan in place, we really needed some great landscape design architects to really make the whole thing sing and dance. We used, because of the timescales, we used an English partnerships panel. English Partnerships then was the government agency for regeneration in the UK. And we used their panel of consultants to put out a brief and get responses from those panels. And we insisted in the brief that we wanted international class design and a whole series of other consultants to be part of the team. We knew that it was going to be very complex and very complicated. And one of the things that I was clear about was that the work that the two professors at Sheffield University had been doing, James Hitchmore and Nigel Dunnett, and the work that they'd been doing best set out in their book called The Dynamic Landscape, that this was a new way of producing landscape. I wanted to draw together city design, landscape design and garden design. So I wrote the brief in the way that would ensure that we got that. So we had terrific ecologists, Peter Shepherd and Sarah Price, the garden designer, as well as George Hargreaves and as well as LDA Design as the design team leaders. So it was a very unique, combination of very, very specialist skills that I knew would guarantee me as the client getting a project that was a fantastic design and would be deliverable. What we did then was the overall engineers for the whole of the park. In the North Park was Atkins, and in the south of the park was Arup. Now they were responsible for making sure the coordination of the incredibly complicated infrastructure, new infrastructure of roads and highways and bridges and utilities and all of that. So we appointed Atkins and Arup, but I appointed them as my team in the Departments of Public Realm as landscape engineers. And I called them landscape engineers, and I insisted that those teams were led by director level landscape architects. So in the north of the park for Atkins it was Alison Brain, and in the south of the park for Arup it was Tom Armour. And their role was to ensure that the designs that we wanted got delivered and were not compromised too much by the underground utilities, and that was a really, really significant challenge. So the way that I structured the project right from the beginning, right the way through, was quite unusual for a project of this, and I empowered landscape architects to have a lead role. And of course with Jason being a landscape architect leading the master plan, that, with the parklands at the heart of it, that thread was driven right from the beginning, right through to the end. And I mean, the park is there now, the games are on now, and I think that everybody who has experienced the park is absolutely overwhelmed by this landscape, which is just extraordinary, very different to anything that anybody has seen before, and landscape architects right at the heart of it. Okay, so going right back to the bid, there was a document that was produced which was Towards a One Planet Living, prepared with the London 2012 bid team, and WWF and Bioregional, who own and founded the whole principle of One Planet Living. One Planet Living is a very simple and elegant way of expressing that we have to live within the resources of the one planet. And with the population expanding, United Nations predictions of around about 9 billion by 2050, 2075. How are we going to live within the finite resources of one planet? And as I was saying earlier, this is about ecological infrastructure. We are going to have to live off ecological interest, not ecological capital. Those Towards the One Planet Living principles were set down into commitments in the bid book. So when the ODA was established to deliver the venues and the infrastructure for London 2012, we converted those into a sustainable development strategy where we set out in more detail what we were going to do on energy, water reduction, wildlife, biodiversity, transport, all of those things. This is the first games that a carbon footprint study, an ecological footprint study was done. And that showed that the majority of the carbon was CO2 emissions from the development was through the work of the ODA. It was not, as you might imagine, airfares, air flights of athletes and spectators coming to the games. It was actually, it was the infrastructure. So it was crucial that we got our targets right, and we set very, very challenging targets. They were way beyond the targets that were extant at the time. And the government also set up the independent 2012 Commission for Sustainable 2012 Games. They were independent, and they oversaw everything that we did and made sure that we were achieving our targets, and they reported annually, and they reported on thematic studies. So biodiversity was a thematic study, energy was a thematic study. And it crossed the whole, from the social, the economic and the environmental as well, including training, local employment, and equality and inclusion issues as well. We achieved the vast majority of the targets that we set ourselves, and that's been independently verified by the Independent Commission on 2012 Sustainability. The one that we missed out on was energy. We did plan and we did have permission for a large wind turbine in the north of the park, and we had done the deal with a design, build, develop organisation. The legislation slightly changed during that process, and it made it impossible to deliver that. So what we did was we used the money that we put aside for that to invest in energy efficiency in the area around the park. So that's how it came about. It came from the towards the One Planet Living principles, the commitments that were set out in the bid, translated into targets. We had what were called priority themes, which were really, really important. So each of the project sponsors on every project, we had to report against our individual targets. Those sustainable targets were driven right through the whole delivery chain, from briefs for designers, right through to contractors and to suppliers. And what was really interesting, and one of the big lessons of the 2012 project, the Olympic Park, is that if you set the targets but you don't tell people how you're going to deliver them, and you drive it through the delivery chain, and you force each party in the project to report against how they're delivering on sustainability, people are really innovative. And once they realise that you're serious and that you have to deliver them, you've got a red, amber or green. You've got a red, serious, how are you going to deliver? Amber, okay, what's the issue? How are we going to get it to green? And people are really innovative about it. And that's how we went beyond a lot of our targets. 97% of materials on the site were reused or recycled. That includes all the contaminated material. 100% of spectators at the Games by public transport. 50% reduction in energy requirements. I think it was 60% or 70% eventually on potable water use. We put in a black water treatment plant, the first time this has been done in this country, with Thames Water, the utility company, and it's a bioreactor, taking raw sewage, cleaning it up as the non-potable grey water system for the whole of the park. Really very innovative. So that's we took it to heart. We knew we wanted to be one of the leaders in the UK and worldwide, and that's how we delivered the sustainability targets. One Planet Living, I think, is going to be fundamental to everything that we do in the future. One Planet Living is what it says on the tin. It's we have only one planet. It is finite in terms of capital resources, the majority of which we've used up in the last 150 years. And that we need to move now to benign infrastructure which works off the interest, not the capital. And basically that means using the power of the sun and the moon to provide all of our energy, our food, and to provide everything that we need to live. It's also about equity. Of the over 7 billion people who live on the planet currently, there are still 1.2 billion who live in abject poverty. Not enough food, no shelter, no sanitation, no education, no healthcare, nothing, abject poverty. And that is unacceptable. Global governments have agreed the Millennium Development Goals, and we're not going to achieve those. And we have an economy that is driving us in the wrong direction. The current economic model puts growth above everything else. You cannot have finite growth, infinite growth on a finite planet. So we have to transform our economy to one that is based on the ecological capacity of the street, the region, the city, the country, the globe. So, ecological footprinting is the methodology that sits behind One Planet Living. So if you're a product designer designing a table, you need to do the cradle-to-cradle ecological footprint of that table from creating it. Are you using finite resources? If you're using finite resources, how do you pay the full cost of using up that finite resource that cannot be used ever again? How is it going to be recycled? Is it going to be reused? Is it designed to last 150, 200, 300 years? All of those issues need to be taken into account. So master planning, building projects, everything that we do will start with an ecological footprint analysis. What is its impact on the environment? How are we going to deal with the wastes of this project? Waste is a concept that we have to completely transform. We can't throw anything away. We have nowhere to throw it. If we do throw it away, it pollutes, it accumulates. So living within the resources of the one planet is a very, very serious challenge. It is really difficult. The Olympic Park project has showed how difficult it is. We did well, just a step on the way. So we need to change our economy to one that doesn't say you have to have a growth economy. How can you have growth? Growth is measured by GDP, gross domestic product. That economic model does not take account of depletion of resources. There is no cost to that. All goods are counted as free. It does not take account of the polluting effects. So air is free, water is free. So all of those costs have to be accounted for in the ecological economic model. And, as I say, it has to be based on ecological capacity. And it has to be based on equity. Currently we have vast inequalities, both in Western countries. The 1% movement has highlighted this for us. You know, we have increasing inequity. We have to change that. If you take this table as an example, if that table was the planet, how do you and I share out that one table? Because there is only one table. And how do you and I share out that one table for future generations? How many generations into the future? So there's some very complex issues: intergenerational equity, current global population equity. How do we distribute resources? How do we set up a new infrastructure that works off the repetitive ecological cycles for our materials, for our water, for our food, for our transport systems, for our arts and our culture and enjoyment of life? So that's basically what One Planet is about. The One Planet Living themes, the 10 themes, are excellent because they cover not just the environment, they cover the social and the economic as well. And basically it's about, one of the themes is health and happiness. And we need to transform our economy to one where we say, are people happy or not? Are they content? There's a different way of thinking about life, the universe and everything. Yeah, public consultation is absolutely critical. It's difficult to remember now with the games on and it being so successful, but of course, as soon as the euphoria of winning the bid dissipated, there was huge scepticism about the ability of UK PLC effectively delivering such a huge project on time and within budget. First thing the ODA did was to make sure that there was adequate budget and that the benefits of building at this scale in such a short time were really exploited, and that's why the budget was £6 billion for the park, was to ensure that the infrastructure went in to allow the legacy regeneration benefits to be realised, and that was absolutely crucial. We had an incredibly effective communications team that was led by Godric Smith at the ODA as well, and supported by a whole community relations team. And our approach was just to be very consistent. It was to publish what we were going to do. Very early on we published a programme, we published the scope of works, and we published milestones for delivery annually, and we reported honestly against whether we'd delivered against those milestones. We also set the sustainability targets. Now all of those targets were all consulted with our stakeholders, the statutory stakeholders, NGOs, etc., and with the communities as well. And that was not just the local communities. We did a huge number of consultation exercises in the local area, but also London-wide and also nationwide. We did national consultation events that fed into the briefs and into what we were doing to make sure that people both understood. It was a two-way process, an education process for communities to learn about what we were doing, but also for us to learn, what their priorities were, and to feed into the briefs and into the project. We also, as is fairly common on projects of this nature, we ran a lot of fun events, art events that were focused on art. And as you go around the park, we had a really great arts and culture programme, which is really quite subtle. It's not your normal plop art where the art just lands within the park. And we were very clear. We worked very closely with Sarah Weir, who was the head of the arts and culture programme, to make sure that it was embedded both within the venues but also within the landscape. And as you walk around the landscape, it's great now. You just see these things, you think, oh, what's that? You investigate it a little more, and if you want to learn more about it, you can. And a lot of those art events were ideas that came out of consultation events, art workshops that we held with the local community, with schools, and also with art colleges, so the Royal College of Arts, University of East London. So you'll see things in the park now that were really inspired by those people, and those people know. And of course that was all part of getting local ownership. And Phil will probably talk more about the Legacy Company and what they're planning. I know that they are planning a lot of consultation events to make sure that there is that local ownership of the park, because they've been excluded. As soon as we took over the site, we had to close it down because it was such a big. But we did. We had bus tours. I think it was. I don't know how. What figures? 1 million people.
Well, we
bus
took.
Tours.
I think we took 200,000 people around. 200,000 people around, which is quite an unusual thing to do on a construction site, because at times it was most of the time it was phenomenally busy. So, but the great advantage of that is that people can actually see the change, and they can also understand the complexities of a site where, at its busiest, you had 12,000 workers on the park on a daily basis. So people really got the challenges and also the success because they could see it coming out of the ground.
Yeah, one of the other things is that we did was the view tube. So the greenway, which runs across the south of the park, was a great vantage point. And originally, for security reasons, the security folks wanted to close down the greenway. It was actually David Higgins who insisted that we kept it open. David was absolutely committed to the community engagement process. And we built the view tube, and that's actually a community project. We part funded that with the London Thames Gateway Development Corporation, and we got Leaside Regeneration, which is a local regeneration company working with Eric Reynolds. It's a container building, but it's actually run by and for the community. Bike hire, bike workshops, art workshops, and all sorts of things. And that was the place that the public could come to look over the park and have it interpreted, what was happening right before them. So we did a lot, to try and let people know what we were doing and make it as accessible as we possibly could. The key challenges, obviously, time, budget, were the key drivers of what we were trying to do. And then the sustainability targets and the intention of the ODA to change the way that projects were done. Another statistic which is just extraordinary is on health and safety, where just an exemplary record of very, very few reportable incidents, no deaths on the park during the construction of the park. It was just extraordinary health and safety record. It was the equivalent of working on the Olympic Park was the same as working in any office in the UK. It's just extraordinary. The same health and safety risk as working in any office in the UK. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah, I think some of the key challenges in the landscape in particular were that we had a short time to do it, but we wanted to do it properly. We wanted to plant a tree, for example, and plant it once. So this was not a question of producing a landscape which looked nice for the games, but maybe had some challenges afterwards. So we had to get our specification absolutely right and drive that all the way through the teams, from the designers all the way through our construction teams, right to the guys on the ground, so to get them really to appreciate that we wanted something which was going to be here for centuries to all intents and purposes. So we spent a lot of time working on those sorts of aspects. In particular, I suppose some of the things we wanted to do, such as the perennial meadows and indeed the 2012 gardens, were unusual, particularly in the scale that we wanted to do this. So the perennial meadows in the park, the sown meadows in the north of the park, are the largest that has ever been attempted. So we set up trials in the park well in advance of actually doing it on the ground, as it were, to test, in the environment that they will be growing in the soils they will be growing in, how they do, and that really gave us confidence that it would work. Similarly with the wetland planting, which is so key to the regeneration of the River Lee, we set up trials on the banks of the river before we even started any remedial work to see how different sorts of planting, whether, for example, plug planting or planting on mats, pre-sown and pre-planted mats at different levels with different types of plants, to really understand how they would perform in a river with fluctuating water levels, with a lot of sediment and silt, etc. And again, that allowed us to refine our specification and our planting to ensure that we can get it right, and it's doing literally what it says on the tin. It's working out there today. So we did a lot of that. We wanted to take risks, but we wanted to take really educated risks to get the best out of this scheme.
I think the overarching lessons are initially get the brief right. If you get the brief wrong, you're going to be struggling against that. Get the right design teams and expertise in place. Be an informed client. And then allow those design teams to deliver against that brief. And then to get the right contractors. So it's about people, getting the right people with the right skills, and then letting them do what they're good at.
I think there were many innovations, particularly around the landscape and the planting. For example, soil. We knew that we couldn't use any of the soil on the park to grow our plants in for a number of reasons. It didn't meet some human health standards. So we had to develop a series of specifications for made soils. And again, that's where we really wanted to think about sustainability as much as great horticulture and plant growth. So we worked very closely with soil scientists to develop a range of soils. That gave us the luxury, if you like, of fitting the soils to the plant community. So we could, for example, have very free draining soils under our lawns, under our spectator lawns, which are actually holding up extraordinarily well and justifies that approach. Similarly, in our meadows, we could have a particular soil which would support that type of plant community. And we could use effectively waste materials. We could use composted green waste, and we could use some quarry waste materials crushed and incorporated to make these soils. So that's one area, I think. It has been done before, but again, not on this sort of scale. And then we could really get our contractors to work to bring that soil to site by rail. We had a rail head in the site, in the park, which brought many of our materials in, taking lorries off the road, bringing materials in bulk in a much more effective way, and again helping with carbon footprint, etc. So that's one example. Planting, we trialled a lot of planting, particularly our perennial meadows, our wetland plants, and indeed the annual meadows in the south of the park alongside the stadium, the River of Gold planting. And we tested these really again to make sure that we could get it to work, because I think one of the things which we have really showed through this project is that to get it right, it's great design, of course, but also it's science and good horticulture and all these other elements and ecology, putting them all together in a very carefully thought out set of briefs and specifications, etc., etc. So we tried these things in order to get it right, but in order so that later on we can really, through things such as the learning legacy, demonstrate to others how they can take this best practice on.
Many innovations, and even in the hard landscape, one of the things that surprised me was the use of the percentage use of recycled materials, recycled aggregates in the makeup of bases for roads. We used a vegetable binder for the gravel surface dressing. The non-potable water supply for the irrigation system that we put in. We designed the whole of the landscape so that it just needed an irrigation system for establishment. The only permanent areas that will require irrigation are the 2012 gardens and the Great British Garden. So there are many, many innovations that go right down to a very fine-grained, detailed level. One of the responsibilities that the ODA took on was to publish the learning legacy so that people could learn as much as possible. There's a whole learning legacy website that anybody can get onto. I think there's something like 700 papers on there that it's just a compendium of how to deliver a big project like this successfully, that goes from eradication of noxious weeds to timber supply to decontamination to project management systems. It's all there for people to learn. And then of course there's the book.
That was a key part of something we wanted to do. We had this great project. We had innovative approaches to design and horticulture, and we had our two teams of contractors. We split our park north and south, and we had our team BAM Nuttall leading Tier 1 contracts in the north and Skanska in the south. And we wanted to use the park and the build for Olympics as a lever to get some local apprentices trained. And so we set up a scheme where we had 12 originally, and it tailed down to 8. I think a couple dropped out. 8 apprentices who were trained in landscape skills to accredited standard through the build process. They're actually still, many of them are still working on the park, helping to maintain it for games. And I think what we want to do is take this on to the legacy company as well, and the transformation process, and to really think how we can use this park as a great place to train people in horticulture and green skills, something which is really lacking in this country and is desperately needed. And we have the perfect place to do that here now. So they're still working. I hope some of them will stay and be part of the maintenance crew for the park as it goes forward. And of course, the great advantage of that is that these are people who live locally, and again, they can really help take the message out and talk to local people as well about what this park is, and that's really important when it opens to the public, many of whom who have never been in it before. They will be there working in the grounds.
CLM were the ODA's delivery partner, so they managed the delivery of the project on our behalf. So each project sponsor had a project manager to deliver the project. My first project manager was Matt Heel, and I remember sitting down with Matt to explain to him the principle of annual meadows that we were proposing to use in the park. So annual meadows you sow 3 months before you want them to be in flower, and then they're in flower. So Matt said to me, so let me just make sure that I've understood this correctly. The whole area around the stadium and on the riversides and all the landscape there will be bare earth 3 months before the games. I said, yep. He said, I'm not so sure about this. I said, okay, no problem. We will try it for 2 seasons before the games. It's never been done before. So we trialled it, 2 seasons, learnt all the lessons, and well, you can see what's out there. But that was quite a big challenge and a big risk. Never been done on this scale before. Had to be right for the 27th of July 2012, the opening ceremony. But we did it.
Absolutely, and I think in a way, of course, there were lots of risks, but along with CLM, project management partner, we take a very proactive approach to those, and we track them all the way through. And we genuinely thought of everything, and then what could we do if that didn't work, and etc. 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 So, but as John said, we trialled things, we tested things, and that was really to make sure they were going to work and give people confidence as well. That was really important to give the wider ODA and others confidence that what we were doing was not completely mad and was going to happen. So a year before the games, again, the meadows were there, and people could say, yeah, fine, we're happy about this.
I think one of the other risks on projects like this is over design, and one of the mantras I had was keep it simple, keep it green. And I did presentations when I joined the ODA. I did presentations across the whole program because I knew that there would be people there who didn't understand where we were heading and how what they did, whether it was an underground tunnel for power lines or the sewer network or whatever, that they wouldn't quite understand where we were heading. And my view was that if people understood where we were heading, and we gave them a vision and they understood that vision, that they would do their job better and understand where it was all leading. So I did a lot of presentations consistently through the project to make people, as people came in, that they understood, what we were trying to achieve. And to reduce risks, keeping it simple was really important. And I didn't want this to be an overwrought design. And of course, there is great pressure to make it, an absolute, icon of design. Well, I think it is, but for very different reasons than other large-scale projects of this nature. It is simple. I like its simplicity. It's there. It works. It looks beautiful, and it'll be there for generations to come, just getting better and better.
I think the biggest achievement in simple terms is that on the 27th of July 2012 it was there, it was working, everybody was in love with it by then, and we said what we would do and we did it. That's one achievement. I think the other one, which perhaps John can talk about more, is how this will set precedents.
Yeah, I hope that there are two main legacies of the project, the Olympic Park, and what we've done. The first is a legacy for the communities who are already there, who are going to benefit from this investment, and the parklands and the venues and the new houses and shops and jobs and all of those things that will be in that area. And the second is for the design and construction industry on the sustainability agenda. I don't think any major project or any project in this country can now move forward and say, well, we can't address sustainability. We've done it and we've shown how to do it, and we've published all the materials to say how we did it. So I hope that's a legacy. But this is only a step on the way. We are currently living in Europe. We are using up 3 planets worth of resources to sustain our lifestyles, and we have to get that down to 1. And the Olympic project is just a step on the way. It's going to be really tough getting to live within 1 planet resources within Europe. And we need political leadership to make sure that that happens. We need legislation, and we need to change the economy. We need a paradigm shift. We are in serious territory. By the middle of this century, serious climate change will take place. We are not making the moves to reduce the CO2 that we are emitting. We are not conserving the biodiversity of the planet. So I hope that the legacy of this project globally is that our political leaders will look at it and say, there is a different way of doing it and we need to do more. What are the lessons and how can we do more? I mean, I think it's embedded in everything that we've been describing. Everybody who worked on this project learned a huge amount. We were working with the best people, just an extraordinary group of people. If you wanted to be at the top of your profession or whatever you did, you wanted to work on this project. And what's interesting to me is when we were going through the procurement process, it was very, very difficult to win a project, to work on the park and to deliver on the park as a consultant, as a supplier, as a contractor. But even those people I spoke to, we did post-tender interviews with unsuccessful contractors and suppliers, and consistently they said, well, we have learned going through this process, it's upped our game. Just going through the procurement process, we wanted to win it, we understand why we didn't win it, and we have learned, and the next time our bids will be much more robust. So that's really heartening.
I mean, I think one of the key lessons is that certainly other clients or client bodies need to pick up is writing good briefs, understanding exactly what you want and what you want your consultants to do, and then following that all the way through. I think that the brief writing process at the ODA has been extraordinarily exemplary, and there's been a lot of work in how good briefs can be constructed. And then on top of that, John mentioned the priority themes, how you can involve the right sort of writing that brief and then signing it off. So when you go forward through the process of design and ultimately construction, you know that you're all moving in the same direction. You're all aligned, if you like. Everybody who needs to be in that process is aligned and working forward. That's one particular thing for me.
I think the other thing, and I would say this, I'm a landscape architect, but landscape architects need to be at the core of every project, and increasingly so, because vegetation, biodiversity, dealing with natural systems. Engineers can engineer, but they are not trained in design. They are not trained to be creative. So landscape architects need to work much more closely, the core of design teams, with engineers, with mechanical, electrical, environmental engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers. It's the design that is absolutely fundamental. You can have a very, very good engineered, very well engineered project, but it doesn't sing and dance. It doesn't touch people. And landscape architects, we are a jack of all trades. We're not specialists in any particular. We're not soil scientists. We're not ecologists. We're not horticulturalists. But we know that we need these people, and we need to draw them into a project. And the engineers, they do the bulk of the really heavy shifting in the design, but they are not trained as designers. So particularly engineers and landscape architects, I think, need to work much more closely together. It needs to be design-led, then it needs to be engineering-led. But the design has to be focused right the way through. So the landscape engineers did the engineering, and the engineering design made sure that it all worked. But if there was any design change, it was the landscape architects that I said, I want to know that the landscape architects, George Hargreaves is the design director, the landscape engineers, landscape architects, I want to know from them that this works, that the design vision is not being compromised. And if it is, how do we design our way around it to ensure that we're getting what we wanted?
Was it the first time that the term landscape engineer was used?
I don't know.
Is it a new profession?
Quite possibly.
Quite
possibly. Yeah, quite possibly. But I think I do believe this. I mean, there was a letter in the Financial Times from the president of the ICE just after the opening ceremony, saying, great achievement for the British engineering industry. And I just wanted to, and he said, of course, it was a collaborative effort amongst built environment professions. It is, and I would want the professions to come together, to ensure that they are working collaboratively, and that the lead is the lead consultant is there at the right time. The lead changes through a project. You'd start out with an architect or an engineer or a landscape architect, and then it would be the engineer's turn, then it would be the transportation engineer's turn, then it would be the planner's turn in getting planning approval. Let's be grown up about this, and let's just say, okay, for the next 2 or 3 months you're going to lead on this. But never ever forget that it's the design vision that is crucial. If you don't have the design vision and you don't have the client leadership, then you're not going to get what you need at the end of the day.
Well, after the games finished, there's a period called bump out where LOCOG, who put the games on, have to come and remove all their temporary overlay, the tents, the temporary stands, some of the facilities in the park get taken out. And then in October, in late October of 2012, this year, the London Legacy Development Company take over the park. We effectively get given the keys, if you like, and at that time our contractors come in and we start what we call transformation, which is a process which starts then completing finally in spring 2014, and over that period we do a fairly substantial project in its own right. Nothing like the 6 billion for games. It's a £300 million project, but that involves taking down some of the temporary structures. So for example, on the aquatic centre it has these big temporary wings which provide the additional seating for games. They come out. We take out temporary bridges, But perhaps more importantly, we start the process of linking the park into its wider community. The master plan for transformation, which was also developed by LDA Design and working with George Hargreaves, has these elements called stitches, which effectively bring the park out to the edges, to the wider community, so that when the park opens, you don't go to the park is there already, and you walk through the landscape to get to the wider parkland. And that's important because even after the transformation period is finished, there'll be a lot of development platforms for future development, which probably in all reality won't have a lot happening on them for quite a few years. There may be some interim uses. So that's our job, and during that time we will be doubling the size of the parklands. So I think it's a great surprise to people who think that what we built during Games is pretty much it, but actually we come in and turn it from a 50 hectare, more or less, park into a 100 hectare green park. And that will provide, you know, a real focus for the future development of this whole area.
Simon Barnes, who's the sports journalist for The Times, I took him around the park just before I left. Simon happens to be a naturalist as well. And he wrote in his article that this park was not what you might expect from an Olympic park of generalissimos, boulevards and grand statements. And he said that paradoxically the commitment to non-human issues, which is the wildlife and the biodiversity, half of the park is habitat. Paradoxically, that makes the park more humane. I thought it was a very nice way of putting that this is a park that's about humans and wildlife. It's about people and wildlife, and how you can blend those two.
And I think the role of the landscape architect has been to really make that vision happen. You know, they've been, as John has said, and as his book will record, have been fundamental from the beginning, all the way through, and they continue in that role through transformation for the park. The landscape architect and the landscape architect leading the design process have been absolutely fundamental to delivering this park. Without them, it would have been a completely different place, undoubtedly, and certainly wouldn't be getting the sort of interest that it is now.
The strategic role, it's very interesting. With Peter Neal, I've been co-writing a book on the making of the Queen Elizabeth Park, just kind of reliving, the whole nascence of the project, and then right through to delivery. And it became, I already knew this, but it just became extremely clear that the long-term strategic planning from the Thames Gateway scale to the East London scale to the Lee Valley scale to the park scale was really crucial. So I did a lot of work, strategic planning in the Thames Gateway, which culminated in the vision for the Thames Gateway parklands. I did all of the initial work on the East London Green Grid, which was that open space network but I always argued that it was not about open space, that it was about an ecological infrastructure that we will need as our resources are depleted and run out. So it was never just about an open space system, it was about ecological process, which was about water management, flood risk management, water collection, cleansing, even sewage treatment in the landscape through wetland treatment systems, about energy, landscapes for energy, about transport, walking, cycling, all of those kinds of things, about carbon sequestration, about mitigating the urban heat island effect, about biodiversity and wildlife, about food growing, all of those absolutely fundamental and crucial issues that we are going to have to face and to live in a very different way. So there's a whole strategic planning for the whole of the Thames Gateway, which led down. There was the lower Lee Valley Opportunity Area framework that was done, which actually made sure that the park within this bigger picture, was delivered within a context, a social, economic and environmental planning context. So it's a huge lesson for all governments in this country and around the world, that long-term strategic planning is just that. It takes a long time, but if you don't understand where you are heading, when the opportunities arise, like the Olympics arose, then you will not be able to exploit those opportunities. So a really, really important lesson that long-term strategic planning is crucial to the success of any major project, and it's about infrastructure.
And I think when we take the park through, it becomes a public park. One of the key things the legacy company need to do is to tell that story to the public who come into the park and to others who know why is this different, what's so special about it, and what precedence does it set. Certainly a lot of questions and intrigue from the people visiting the park currently about why it is the way it is. But John says there's a really important story which is for the public who use it, but also fits into this much bigger picture.